Welcome to video number 2. We're going to take the flaky pastry that we made in the last video and we're going to roll this out into a nice round piece of dough that we're going to fit into our pie plate, and then I'm going to show you how to shape this into a pie shell. We've taken this directly from the fridge, so we want this to be cold but not frozen, so make sure it's been thawed completely in the fridge. If you happen to have bought a frozen disc from us, you can go ahead and put that in the fridge the night before, or you can pop it on the counter for a couple of hours to let it thaw completely and then put it back in the fridge for about an hour. We are going to start by rolling this out. I am going to put a good amount of flour on top and on bottom. And if you have a clean brush around, that's actually a really nice tool to have so that we can take this extra flour off. Basically, we're going to use the flour sort of like a tool to keep it from sticking to the bench as we're working, but we don't necessarily want all of that flour to stay on the dough, which is where the brush comes in. So I like to use a French rolling pin, something without handles, because it gives me a lot more control over the dough. If all you have at home is a pin like this with handles, I would recommend at this early stage to actually use it by putting your palms directly on the pin itself and not using the handles to begin with, and I'll show you in just a minute why that is. When you roll dough, one of the things that will really help you keep that dough in a nice round is to just roll in one direction, to just roll front and back, and rather than moving the way that the direction that you're orienting the pin, move the dough itself. So that's why it's important to make sure that we have a good amount of flour on top and underneath so that dough can move freely throughout the rolling process. So I'm going to start just by working incrementally in like a couple inch sections, and I'm just going back and forth and stretching this dough out in one direction. And what I want to do is, before I change direction on this, I'm just going to make sure this is as flat as possible. And then I'm going to change that orientation about 45 degrees, and I'm going to roll front to back, working section by section. Another 45 degrees, and when you move it, make sure that you move it just enough to make sure that the whole thing is moving freely on the bench. Okay, once again, I'm just going to go front to back. And I'm not moving my pin this way or that way, just moving the dough. So we're looking for about 1/8 of an inch thickness, and rather than giving people a really specific size, what I like to do is just keep my pie plate close by, and then I can just use it as a reference point. So this tells me I like to have about 2 inches around the perimeter, around the edge of that pie plate in excess dough, and so I want to go just a little bit bigger. At this stage, I also like to kind of fold this dough in half and give it a feel and feel around the edges to see if I feel any spots of the dough that are thicker or thinner. It's really hard to tell from looking top down where you have thick and thin portions of the dough. You really kind of need to feel it. So what I'm feeling here is it's a little thick here and a little thick here, so I can roll this section of the dough. And it's also a little bit thick in the middle there, so I'm just going to focus on that. The one thing that's really nice about using a pin without handles is you're less likely to roll back and forth over the dough. You have a lot more control, and you can just focus, like we will in a moment, you can just focus on sections of the dough that need rolling while ignoring these other portions. Because I know a lot of people end up with sort of sections of the dough that get like mashed to the bench like that. So by not kind of continuously rolling over the entire piece of dough, we can avoid that and get a really nice and even piece of dough. So now our dough is rolled out to the thickness and size that we want, and we're going to fit it into our pie plate. So there's a couple of ways to move your dough. We're going to start by taking any extra flour off the top, and then we can either move the dough by folding it in half, and I'm going to flip it over to take off any extra. So you can fold it in half or fold it in quarters and move it to your pie plate like so, and then unfold. If your dough's gotten a little bit soft and it's not easy to pick it up, or that makes you really nervous, you can go ahead and roll it up onto the pin. So what we're going to do is just roll it gently over here And again, as I go, I'm gonna take off any excess flour on the bottom there. Most of my recipes say to grease your pie tin. I've really gone back and forth on this over the years, and right now I'm kind of in a not greasing phase. So if you're noticing that inconsistency, you're correct. Okay, so what we want to do is make sure that this dough is nicely centered over that pie plate, and then we're going to fit it into the corners. Now the temptation is to take the dough and sort of stretch it into the corners, but what's going to happen is if we stretch the dough sort of past where it's been rolled to at this stage, it's really likely that it's just going to pop out. And so you're going to get, rather than corners that go like this, you're going to get this sort of sloping action on your pie, which, you know, doesn't look as good, and it also doesn't allow for as much filling because you have this big air pocket there where the corner should be. So what we want to do to avoid that is pick that dough up and slide it down. So rather than stretching the dough, we're picking up the edge of the dough and letting kind of it slide down that side of the pie pan until it hits the bottom. So once we've got that fit in nicely, we're going to go ahead and trim the edges. I'm just going to use some scissors and cut this to about 1 to 1.5 inches of excess. So for a pie like this, where we have a single crust, I like to leave a little more excess on there and beef up this side just so that I can bake this a little bit longer without it getting too dark. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to fold this under, and I'm going to tuck this excess dough within the lip of my pie plate. And then I'm going to push back so that I'm pressing that seam into the side. Now the most important part of your of getting a nice crimp is actually not the crimping itself, but this stage right here, where we're making sure that this is nice and securely folded over, and that it's nice and it has a nice even distribution of dough. Okay, now we have this all folded under, and what I'm going to do is just go through and flatten that edge, or flatten this side against the side of the pan, and just make sure this all looks really nice and even. And you can even just leave your pie crust at this stage and just leave it open like that, but we'll go ahead and crimp it. Depending on, you know, the size of your fingers, you might use different fingers, but I use my index finger and my thumb, and then my index finger on the other side. Some people use a knuckle because they like a bigger crimp. So it's really just kind of a matter of what seems best to you. So what we're gonna do is we're going to push the dough out like so. And what we want is we want the inside of the crimp to kind of hit the inner edge of the pie plate lip, and we want the outside to just go a little bit beyond. If we push too far in, this whole crust risks sort of sinking into the pie. And if we do the same, if we have the pie crust like leaning out over the edge, we run the risk of that drooping and falling. So we do want to keep that nicely centered on top of the lip of your pie plate. Making these weird marks. So if we look at the side, you can see all of those, the edge of the dough is all tucked away underneath, and this is nicely rolled out and crimped. So what I'm going to do at this stage is I'm going to pop this in the freezer and get it nice and cold. So I like to chill it for about half an hour to an hour. You can also freeze it for up to a month in this shape if you want to get ahead. And then in our next video, I will show you how to blind bake this. thanks for watching, and yeah, I hope that was helpful.